the moment our fellow geeks, dweebs, nerds, and other unfortunates have been fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerf Herder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker, and Mike Mjolnir Evans. And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
The dynamic duo today.
What do you call it when Jeff and you were doing it?
I don't think we call it anything.
Okay, dynamic duo it is then.
Yeah. This is the second time that Jeff has skipped out on an episode. I think the first time was when you and I discussed Jurassic World, if I'm not mistaken. Not the most auspicious of episodes.
No, but it was an episode.
It was an episode. I think we might have higher hopes for this one, though.
Yes, we might.
Yeah. So today we are getting into the good old monster movie genre. We're discussing Crawl. And in a rather unimaginative leap to choose a classic feature, we stuck with the reptilian theme and we're going with Lake Placid.
It's an awesome pairing, actually.
It's a very enjoyable pairing. So if you watched along with us, you're welcome.
Yeah, and I think I watched it in the right order, which was Lake Placid first.
Oh, really? I didn't do that. So I think you're right. I think it would have been better if I watched the Lake Placid first and then Crawl to kind of lead up to it. But yeah, it was, I watched it reversed.
Yeah, it just gets you into the mood.
So Jeff normally is the provider of our news, and we're not skipping out on you. Mike has brought some news to the table. I have some items too. If Mike doesn't cover these, I've got some written down here. So Mike, what do we got?
Well, we have a couple of things. Now, the first one's a rumor, which Variety magazine places Millie Bobby Brown in the Eternals. However, not confirmed by Kevin Feige yet. But what we have is Marvel is returning to Hall H for San Diego Comic-Con. So that'll be Saturday, July 20th. So we might hear something about that next week.
I heard that they're expecting major revelations about Phase 4 at San Diego Comic-Con.
Now, for 8 years, I've been trying to go to San Diego Comic-Con, and I have just surrendered. I am never going to go.
How close did you make it last year? You did attempt.
Yeah, I've been in the queue and have never been able to get tickets.
So you just mingled with the riffraff on the outside of the building, right?
Yeah, that's about as far as it's gone. I've only been in San Diego during San Diego Comic-Con once. I have never actually been in the building.
Well, you made it farther than many of us, so.
Yes. Also in the news, the third Walking Dead spinoff is being cast, okay? And this has 2 female leads as the focus for the first generation to come of age in the apocalypse. Now, when I had finally read the last issue of The Walking Dead from the comic book, Kirkman says there's actually 4 Walking Dead spinoffs, or 3 Walking Dead spinoffs and 1 Walking Dead. So I know that nobody's really watching this anymore. I don't know why they're spinning this off anymore, but here it comes.
Now, when he says spin-off, is he referring to TV or to the comics?
To TV.
Now, tell us, risking spoilers, which we risk openly every week, how does the comic end?
It ends with Carl and Sophia have a baby, and they're living happily ever after in the Walking Dead universe.
So there's no cure?
There is no cure. What they've actually done is there's sort of this East Coast group, which is the Rick Grimes Carl group, and then there's a West Coast group, and they're building train tracks and have a locomotive that actually reaches out to the West Coast, and that's where it ends.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty good. They call it the trials is what they went through, because everyone had to find their own way through, that Walking Dead Walker kind of type of thing. It was a fitting end to it. I was actually very pleased with it.
Really? So it is really like a throwback to the Industrial Revolution, starting over again.
Exactly. It was a good end. I mean, he wanted to go to 300 issues, and it ended at, I don't know what it was, issue 193 or whatever it is. It needed to end. And he actually solicited issues in previews, which tells us what's coming in the comic books for the next couple of months, as if it wasn't going to end. So it was a surprise to many readers. And I was happy that it was in my pull list.
Okay, so let's get into that. Did your guys charge you any more in your comic shop for what the cover cost was?
Matt, Jay, absolutely not.
Those are some guys right there. They hook you up.
Absolutely.
Do they listen to the show? Let's give them a shout out.
You know what? I've left the cards there, so they may be listening to it. So for Cave Comics in Newtown, Connecticut, this is your shout out.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of listeners in Connecticut, so stop by.
Last bit of news is August 12th through the 13th. The prop store in California is auctioning off props, screen use props from the Netflix Marvel shows. And so they think that the Daredevil costume will go for about $50,000, but there's smaller items, and I actually placed a bid on a Rand coffee cup for $50.
Really?
Yes.
Are you ahead? Have you been checking it out?
I am the sole bidder.
You are the sole bidder. How many more days does it have?
It has until August 12th, so about a month.
Oh, no. Maybe I should edit this part out so nobody hears and goes to bid on it.
Right, yeah, really. Come on, people. So it was light from a news standpoint, but I'm interested to see what you have, Jim.
Well, we did discuss a little bit, so I would just like to bring this back up again. During our Spider-Man Far From Home discussion, there was some dissension in the ranks as to how long Nick Fury was a Skrull. Jeff put the opinion out there, well, maybe Nick Fury has been a Skrull for many of these Marvel movies, not just Spider-Man Far From Home, but Mike and I were firmly in the camp, it's just happening in Far From Home since Endgame. And Feige and the director of Far From Home has confirmed our suspicions that it has not been Talos for Infinity War and Endgame and movies before that since Captain Marvel. Talos has only been masquerading as Nick Fury in Far From Home. So everybody can rest easy.
So take that, Jeff.
I wanted to also bring up some Spider-Man news that the Marvel-Sony deal, I read something very interesting about this, is that once they brokered this deal to get Marvel Studios involved in Sony's Spider-Man movies, what they did was they hashed out that if each solo Spider-Man picture made $1 billion worldwide, then the Marvel-Sony relationship would continue on to another Spider-Man movie. And there were 3 movies altogether, 3 solo, and that was the stipulation. If the first one made $1 billion, then they'd go on to the second. If the second one made $1 billion, then they'd go on to the third. And that's all that they have in Tom Holland's contract at the moment. So obviously Homecoming did it, so they moved on to Far From Home. Far From Home is fast reaching that number, so most likely there will be a third Tom Holland, Marvel Studios, Sony collaboration.
Do you know what the split is? I mean, what's in it for Marvel and what's in it for Sony to do it, to have this relationship?
Well, Sony, I don't know specifically, but if you were Sony, you would definitely want to jump on this gravy train of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think, to have their movies affiliated with Marvel officially that are just hitting them out of the park one after the other, especially after the disappointment of the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. I think that's a no-brainer in terms of Sony. And Marvel, I think, is just kind of working their way back to the character. Maybe it's just a way of getting some more control. And obviously, they want Spider-Man back in their canon because he is, if not one of the most popular Marvel characters that there is. So I think it works for both parties.
Yeah, if I was Sony, I would be hanging onto this with my fingertips.
Oh, yeah. And if it didn't make $1 billion, I'd still continue. And I would be on my hands and knees begging Tom Holland to continue as well.
Right. If it made like $999 million, does it fall apart?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess the deal is done. Then they go back to Andrew Garfield after that. Now, and also, not only are there 3, because obviously we've seen Spider-Man now in other Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, other than these 3 solos that we're talking about. So the deal was that there would be 3 solo, and there would be 3 movies where Marvel could use the Spider-Man character in their Marvel Universe only movies that weren't Sony. So we've already seen him in Civil War. We've seen him in Infinity War, and we've seen him in Endgame. So those 3 are, I suppose, done. So I'm not sure if we're going to see Spider-Man in another Marvel Studios film apart from Sony.
We're going to find out next week.
Yeah, we will. We will. And let me see. What else do I have? Oh, sad news. Denise Nickerson, who is better known as Violet Beauregard from the Willy Wonka movie with Gene Wilder, 1971, has died at 62 years old.
Ooh.
So farewell, Denise. Very sad news. One of my favorite movies.
Peace.
And also, before we leave Spider-Man, before we leave the news, there was one more confirmation I'd just like to put out there. I think in the same article that I read that Talos was not masquerading as Nick Fury for more than one movie. Director John Watts confirms there is no Earth 616. It was completely a fabrication of Mysterio and Peter Billingsley of A Christmas Story fame.
So there is no multiverse? I mean, that's what I thought part of this was in introducing this. And now
there is a multiverse. There is a multiverse, but Mysterio, as we kind of figured last week, capitalized on it and made up this story around the multiverse. So I don't think that they're losing that multiverse angle just yet.
So you're saying there is a multiverse, but not confirmed by Mysterio?
Correct. Yes. Mysterio probably saw Into the Spider-Verse just like we did, and he jumped on it.
He read a comic book.
He did. Spider-Man just keeps giving. There is an Easter egg in there. Before the first attack of Hydra Man in Italy, Peter Parker goes into a gift shop to buy MJ a necklace or whatever it was, a little black dahlia. Jake Gyllenhaal is in the background spying on him. And it was only caught by an eagle-eyed viewer who did a screenshot, and there he is. He's with a baseball hat. He's with a Hawaiian shirt, but he is in the shop looking over his shoulder in a very quick shot, following Peter Parker. So yeah, so there could be more. Who knows? We're going to have to watch it again.
So was he wasn't really following Peter Parker, right? He was more just walking the streets?
No, why would he be? Would he be shopping? I don't think he's that kind of guy.
But he doesn't know Peter Parker's Spider-Man, right?
But I think he does because he's already working with Nick Fury, right? So I think Mysterio's there because of Peter Parker and Nick Fury. He might not be doing it nefariously. He might be doing it in tandem with S.H.I.E.L.D. He's there.
You're not, by the way, are you watching S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Is it still on?
It is.
Yeah, no, I'm not watching.
It's filling up my DVR.
This week, we are talking Crawl. Now, this is one of those great movies where I don't have to waste a lot of breath telling you what the plot is because there is so little plot.
Hello, can anybody hear me? I'm trapped in my father in a house in Coral Lake. Please send help.
So here's the setup. You're in Florida, and there's a dysfunctional family story going on. A character by the name of Haley and her sister Beth, they're trying to help their father through a difficult split with his wife. On the cusp of a Category 5 hurricane, Haley is an expert swimmer. The movie opens and she is at a swim meet and she just misses the first place. But you would think that just before a Category 5 hurricane lands in Florida, you would cancel this swim meet. Now, it shouldn't just take the smooth, dulcet tones of the mayor's trailer voiceover type announcement to give them a clue.
The state of Florida has issued a Category 5 hurricane warning. All residents must evacuate immediately. Grab your families, your loved ones, and get out. We won't be able to come for you.
This should be on the TV news, shouldn't it? A Category 5? They see these things coming days in advance, and as soon as the swim meet is over, boom, the hurricane hits them. So
turn on the TV. Yeah,
turn on a TV, get out of there. Her sister calls her, all worried about their father because they haven't heard from him. And of course, he's despondent, he's depressed because his wife has left him, and he's not returning their calls. So Haley takes it upon herself to go out in Florida, into the swamps, to find him. He is not at his condo, he's left his dog there by herself. So she takes the dog and they go to their old family home, which her father has put up on the market. And she searches around, she's calling him, he's not answering. She takes it upon herself to go into this crawl space of a basement, this disgusting, dirty, muddy basement in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. And she comes upon her father who's unconscious and he is all bloody, he's ripped up. And the reason being, they got alligators in the basement. And that's basically the plot of the movie.
Right. Now it's how do we get out of the basement?
How do we get out of this basement? Yes. So this is the great thing about this movie. It's not like they're radiated giant alligators. They're big, mind you, they are big, but they're not out of the scope of reality. It's just a nest of alligators that have found a nice place to lay their eggs in this basement. And unfortunately, they're between Haley, her father, and the stairs of the basement, so they can't get out, and there's no available windows for them to get out either. So therein lies the setup. So her father can't move because he's all injured. His bone is coming out of his leg. So Haley's got to crawl around the basement to find another way out. So there's a lot of, Haley, are you okay? Yes, I'm over here. Are you okay now? Yes, I'm over here.
Haley, are you hurt?
I'm fine.
So, but it's good. It's really good, suspenseful. There's a lot of surprises. Alligators coming out of the water when you don't expect it, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
I mean, the thing was, they had the one alligator, and then there's now 2 alligators, and then there's like 10 alligators, and you're like, how many alligators are there here?
Yeah, you wouldn't think that there's room enough in the basement to hold all these alligators.
No, I mean, did you ever have this point in time where you thought, because in the basement crawl space, they sort of had this lattice work of concrete that you could see through. And I thought, why not bust that shit out and get out that way?
Yeah, you should have enough tools in the basement, like at least a hammer, to try to get that through, right?
Well, they had a shovel.
They did have a shovel, yes. And we were told very specifically by the dad that if he were to bang on the pipes, it disorients the alligator. So they use that a lot as a plot device in this movie to kind of move around in the basement to distract the alligator so she can get by.
But at one point, it seemed to bring the alligators towards him, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. It was almost like blood in the water for sharks. So
right.
It was kind of a crapshoot.
And that was part of the thing. I mean, these guys were just bloody at the end, right? I mean, they're just all like beaten up bloody and stuff like that. There's so much blood in the water. And you're thinking, why is it? I mean, do alligators act like sharks where they're attracted by the blood?
I don't know. That's a good question. I didn't do enough research, I think, before the show to see if that was the case. And was that our alligator crap that she stepped in the very beginning of the movie when she goes into the basement?
Right, when she lost her flip-flops and the rats were running around, who knows?
It was either her father's or it was the alligator.
So did you actually feel like the jump scares? I had it a couple of times where I was surprised, where I kind of knocked back.
Yes, I was. Especially when, I think the character's name is Pete, the deputy that comes, and they're doing a search in the houses, and he's looking down into the crawl space, and he's talking to him, and alligator comes up and grabs him.
Down here. Okay, hold on. Don't move, hold on. Need your coffee? Did you hear that?
That was a good jump scare.
That was. Now, he ended up living longer than I thought he was going to live. And she's sort of reaching out to him as he's halfway into the alligator. And I'm like, this is going on a little bit too long for me. I kind of had to look away as the blood was splattering and the water was thrashing.
And then the other guy, his partner, got it like immediately afterwards as well. We're not talking about the fact that there's a gas station exactly across the street from the old family house that the father is selling. Now, first of all, if I had to live in a house that looked out over a gas station in a Florida swamp, I think I'd want to leave too. I think the mother is justified a little bit there.
Right? She fled all the way to France.
Yes, she did. So early on in the movie, once the two characters are trapped in the cellar, they hear some noise going on in this gas station. And through this lattice concrete that Mike just mentioned, she sees the front of the gas station being looted by these 3 typical denizens, maybe, of a Florida swamp.
Right. They're like, hey, we'll take this ATM machine with us.
Exactly. They're loading the ATM machine into their little boat. And, of course, the alligators hear the commotion going on. And they come and they take care of the looters.
Quite handily, right? There's always the sort of the loser that's still in the store, picking up stuff, who doesn't realize what's going on, and then finally ends his demise.
Yes. So this is where the second cop, when our deputy gets it in the basement, our second cop kind of sees that boat with the ATM machine. Hey, something's not quite right over there. And then, of course, the alligators that chomp down on the looters chomp down on him. But then they get out of the basement and they get the boat that the looters had, but then the levees break and then the boat goes right through the front windows of the house. It's just a series of events. They cannot get out of this house ever. Just events conspire to keep them in there.
Yeah, but there's this whole notion where her father's saying the levee's going to break, we're going to get the boat, and she says you can swim for it, you're faster, right? You're the apex predator, and I'm thinking nothing outswims an alligator, right? So she she takes off for this boat with these alligators swimming around, and I'm like, this is insane, right? I would stay in the house no matter what and take my chances.
And there's a lot of nods, I think, to Jaws in here. Because you get a lot of underwater shots, obviously, from the alligator's point of view of the kicking legs as she's trying to get into the boat. She's trying to pull herself out of the water in the basement. So it's not like it's a ripoff because it's done as effectively in its own way.
Yeah, but they had this thing. It was actually, I laughed at it when they end up back in the house and she says something like, you're going to have to bleep me. You have to be kidding me when the boat comes back in the house and they're where they started.
As the movie goes on, they're just going farther up into the house until they finally make it into the upstairs bathroom. And there's one great scene that the levee waters have flooded the house so much it's coming up to the second level of the house. So their picture windows are pretty much underwater. And the alligator comes right up to the window and bursts through. So then at that point, the alligator's chasing her around the stairs, up into the bathroom, until they finally make it up upon the roof and they can signal a helicopter.
And who keeps a vase full of flares? Right, I might need flares in case the alligators attack. I mean,
that's a good idea. Maybe we should get some flares in our emergency kit.
But they did have that great scene where she was actually, when she's in the bathroom and she locks the alligator into the shower tub.
Yes.
Yeah, she does this thing where she's going to jump off over the top of the shower and bring the alligator in and lock the alligator in. And I was like, okay, now that's a move.
Yep. And that was the climactic move as well. That was before she made it up to the roof. That was one of the last things she did.
But what about the dad? I mean, he was just, he was beaten from the first time where he was unconscious. And he eventually gets his arm just ripped off. And he's still mobile.
Yeah, it's just a flesh wound. Now, both of these characters get ripped, they get bitten, they got limbs completely in the alligator's mouth. There's one great scene where Haley gets the gun from Pete's mutilated body.
Oh, genius.
The alligator chomps down on the arm that's got the gun, and she's firing into the mouth of the alligator as he's chomping on her arm. And like you said, she pulls it out and it's still mobile. It's like nothing. It's like, all right, it's all right. I just got a few tooth marks. That's okay.
I'll just shake it off.
Now, apparently, I was reading into this. There is a much harder R version that really doubled down on the gore. And they decided to cut it back because the director thought that it didn't need it. It would take it into the realm of the unreal if they went there, I think. Because this is the reason that it's scary and it's so suspenseful is it's completely possible if you live in Florida. You've got the threat of gators all around you. You're not a horror movie guy, Mike.
No, I'm not. And I was a little bit worried about it because I'm not a horror guy. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to take one for the team. I'm going to do this.
So were you apprehensive once the movie started, or were you just like, as soon as the first attack happened, were you down for the ride?
No, I think they eased me into it because the first part of the movie was the swim meet. And so, okay, we have a swim meet, everything's happening. And then there's like, okay, we've got the hurricane. So I was eased into it.
So this was not like a Hellboy situation where you were like, I am getting up before the ending of this movie and leaving.
No, not at all.
Okay. And it was short. It was lean too. Not even an hour and a half, which some of these movies need to be. It was got in, got out, and leaves you wanting more.
Right. Now, were you rooting for the dog Sugar?
I was. Especially at the point before the levees broke and they're walking out of the house and he's telling her not to thrash around, to be very still as you walk towards the boat and the alligators won't come. I'm not really sure how that works. You know a lot about sharks, how they think boats or surfers look like seals, but I'm not sure how alligators work, what their modus operandi is. So I'm just taking what these characters say as word.
Well, that was sort of the point. Like they were going to go and it was in the middle of the hurricane. The rain's going to distract. They're not going to be able to hear. But what I didn't understand is why all three of them have to go for the boat, carrying a dog with them.
True.
Right. Why not get the boat, come back, get the other people, and then move? Because
at one point they lose the dog. And then you see the dog again at the end once it's back up on the roof. Like, oh, there's the dog. It was just kind of swimming until the coast was clear, and then it jumped back up on the roof.
But you're right, Jimmy. You do get those like Jaws moments where you're actually seeing like the feet underwater. You see like little doggy feet, little women feet.
And of course, the big metaphor is that it doesn't matter that she lost the swim meet. She beat an alligator. So she was fast enough to beat the alligator and to save her father's life. And in doing so, it was a bonding moment for the father and daughter.
Right. She can keep her scholarship.
Exactly. Yes. Now, Barry Pepper. He is from our beloved Saving Private Ryan. I think he was the sniper from Saving Private Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Oh, was he? You know what? I thought I recognized him, and I'm like, where is he from?
Yeah, since Saving Private Ryan, he's played a lot of character parts in quite a few genre movies, I think. So he's been pretty active since then. And this movie was produced by Sam Raimi, famous for the original trilogy of Spider-Man films, and of course the Evil Dead movies. So he didn't have any creative input really into this. He just kind of helped it get made. The director was Alexandre Aja. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that name. But this guy is a hardcore horror director. He directed Hills Have Eyes, Piranha, which was a completely over-the-top horror/comedy. So I'm surprised at the restraint he had in this movie, but I think it paid off. Kaya Scaladario plays Haley, an English actress. So again, they're outsourcing these American parts to England because you'd never know it.
Right. We couldn't find one person who was a Florida native to do this.
Yeah, I know that's a good. And I'm not really sure if she did her own stunts. I didn't see anything like that. But another interesting fact is this was filmed in Belgrade, Serbia. Was not filmed in Florida.
Really?
So, not quite sure why. Maybe it was for budgetary purposes. But yeah, not filmed in the United States whatsoever.
Getting tax credits back.
Probably yes. And we're not the only ones that enjoyed this cinematic experience. It had an 88 fresh score on Rotten Tomatoes, an aggregate of all the reviews out there. And it got a solid B from CinemaScore audiences polled coming out of the theater opening weekend. So people are liking this, I think. Yeah,
it is a good summer fun movie.
Now, was your theater packed, or was it because it was during the day? Was it pretty empty? Is that you? That's usually your experience, right?
Well, I mean, there were more people than there were for Dark Phoenix, where I was the only person who watched the movie. But normally the early morning movies don't have a lot of people in it, particularly on a beautiful day in the Northeast. So definitely not packed. How about yours?
Well, I went on Friday night, so it was a loud, raucous audience. And of course, you get the teens that sneak in halfway through the movie, take selfies in the theater, and then leave after 10 minutes. So that comes with the territory when you go on a Friday night in a mall movie theater. But unfortunately, there was no other time I could go. But yeah, the audience was totally getting into it and loving it. No boos at the end or guffaws or anything like that, like you sometimes hear in a teen-filled audience. It was silent during all the right parts.
I don't think it's in a lot of theaters because I have 2 theaters within 10 minutes of me here. Neither of them had it. So I ended up going out to Danbury to see it, which was okay. Although I will tell you this, why cannot people keep their cell phones off during the movie? Why go to the movies if you're going to be on your cell phone?
Yeah, it's true. Or have discussions with the person sitting next to you.
I mean, why do it?
It's like, go to a diner, don't come here. It's true. Movies are costing more and more. You pay money to come and sit to talk to your friend and not watch what's going on here. Every once in a while you're distracted by what's happening on screen. You watch, for 2 seconds with slack mouths and drool coming out, and then you start your conversation again with the person that's sitting next to you. It's ridiculous, but we digress.
There should be like a banning of these people.
There should. I think theater employees should sit in the theater at all times, kind of like a federal officer on an airplane. Plain clothes, maybe, and then, come put the hand on the shoulder. And
they were actually shamed in my theater. They're like, down in front, turn off your phone,
Yeah. So what kind of buckets would we give this?
Oh, boy, I don't know, Jim. You're going to have to go first there.
All right. I'm going to go, I'm sparing with the buckets. I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was a great movie. I just thought it was a nice summertime distraction. I'm going to go 3.5.
You know what? I think you put it right. It's a summertime distraction. I'm going to go 3. It was worth the hour and a half.
Yeah, 3 is good. 3 is decent and solid. Right. So once you get into the 2 and the 2 3/4, then you're looking at this is not worth your time. But 3 is, I think, a solid bucket rating.
Now for Jeff, if Jeff were here, he'd probably be at a 4.
Before we leave Crawl, we would just like to shout out our friends at Podcoin because we're getting more and more listeners every week. And this is all because of this great new app called Podcoin. When you listen to podcasts on Podcoin, you get points. So you can earn gift cards like Amazon, Starbucks. From what I'm looking at, they're adding gift cards on a daily basis. So the prizes that you can get are more and more varied, or you can give to charity. We like to talk up a charity called Books for Poor Kids because we often utilize our local libraries to get our classic movies and watch them and review them for you. So we like to talk up libraries and reading. On your phone, go to the App Store, look for Podcoin, download it. And once you do, use our code TMI Nerdkind to get 300 points right off the bat. That's TMI Nerdkind to get 300 points. Then subscribe to us, listen every Wednesday for new episodes, and get points. And it's as easy as that.
Yeah, and I think you also, if I remember, you get bonus points for uploading a picture, listening to your first podcast, that sort of thing. So
yes.
It starts to rack up pretty good.
And often we find ourselves in the bonus category. So you can often get bonus points for just listening to us. So it all works out in the end.
It does. And I'm actually, and I'll give a shout out to a podcast that I'm listening to, not that I want to distract people from coming to us. If you are or were a Dungeons and Dragons fan, I highly recommend a podcast called Critical Role, which is absolutely genius. Now each episode's about 3 hours long, and it follows the adventures by probably the best dungeon master on the planet.
Really?
So if you're interested in a role-playing Dungeons and Dragons podcast, I would suggest Critical Role.
So now you found this on Podcoin?
Yes, I did. It is on Podcoin. And it's just absolutely fabulous.
And speaking of podcasts, I was trolling through Facebook this morning, and I found an article. Now, as you know, Mike is actually in Connecticut, as he often mentions. And
is it too much? Do I say Connecticut too often?
No. It's good for people to get a reference as to where we are. And Jeff is in the lower Hudson Valley, and I am in the upper Hudson Valley. So sometimes we refer to this podcast as the nerdiest podcast in the Hudson Valley. So imagine my surprise when I was on Facebook and I saw an article from Hudson Valley Magazine, an online article naming the 8 top podcasts of the Hudson Valley. And I looked at it and guess what? We're not on it. So
I was ready to cheer.
Yeah, no. So big middle finger to Hudson Valley Magazine. They do name a couple of other movie podcasts. There's one called, I think it's called The Marvelite, and all they talk about are Marvel movies. That's it. And I would think that that's kind of finite, that you would have an end to that podcast eventually, unless you just kind of go through them all over again once you hit the last movie.
Well, if you get all of this stuff, was Nick Fury, a scroll from the beginning, I guess that's a whole podcast.
Yeah, I guess they could stretch it out. But what I'm trying to say is we have more variety. So if you found us, bully for you.
Right. Well done, you.
Yes, well done, you. You have excellent taste if you're listening right now. So speaking of excellent taste...
Candy is delicious food, eat some every day. Oh, we ride in the rodeo, roping steers and busting broncos, and we haven't had a bite to eat since dawn. We are hungry and we're dragging, but here comes the old chuck wagon with the fiddles that we long for. Bring her on!
Now I'm the U.S. Marshal. To soft drinks I am partial.
And this popcorn's good. My gosh, I say it be. We like 'em, lick 'em, ice cream, and this ice cream, very nice cream.
You buy 'em,
and you try 'em, and you see. Now it's time for intermission, so let's all hit the trail and gather round the sweet bar where these goodies are on sale.
We have another, this one is actually a crocodile movie and not an alligator movie. Now, I did look up what the difference is between an alligator and a crocodile. It's not that much. It's just pretty much the shape of the snout. So with the alligator, you have the more classic, rounded off, almost squarish kind of snout. And with a crocodile, you've got more of a V-shaped with some teeth hanging out on the side. So obviously they're from the same family of reptile, but you do have some physical differences.
Well, it's good to know what's about ready to eat you,
Yeah, and they both like to eat people, apparently. They will not discriminate when it comes to people. So our next film is Lake Placid. Now, this is not Lake Placid, New York. Let's get that out of the way right now.
That drove me ape. I was like, why?
There's a throwaway reference to it in the movie when it starts, because they say because the waters of this lake, it takes place in the fictional Black Lake, Maine. So this whole movie is set in Maine. So it's actually called Black Lake, but their locals call it Lake Placid because it is so calm. The waters are so calm. I'm like, well, any lake's waters are so calm. It's not like you're getting waves on a lake unless a boat goes by. Looking up research on this movie after I watched it, sometimes if you Google a movie title, you'll have the most often asked questions about this movie. And the most often asked question about Lake Placid, the movie, is Lake Placid a true story?
What?
Come on. America. Is there really a 30-foot alligator in Lake Placid, New York?
Did people think that this was a documentary?
Apparently so. Apparently so.
You don't know I'm moving to France.
Yeah. America, please. So yes, right up front, this does not take place in Lake Placid, New York. It takes place in Black Lake, Maine. And I think that would have been a better horror movie title, to be honest. This movie does not take itself seriously one iota. This is a movie steeped in the 90s as well. You cannot separate the 90s out of this movie if you had a scalpel and a chainsaw. And it's actually 1999, but it's like holding on to that decade for dear life. It is not moving into the next decade whatsoever. So this is about, again, this time it's a crocodile, but this is a bona fide monster movie. It is a giant crocodile in the mold of Jaws. And I actually caught a couple of references to not Jaws, but Jaws 2. Because right in the beginning, there's a fish and game diver. Ostensibly, he's trying to tag beavers, I think he said.
Yes.
By tagging them in their ears or something. And that's why he's diving into the lake to do something bad to the wildlife there. And he gets it back in spades because he is the first victim of this giant crocodile. And Brendan Gleeson, famously of 28 Days Later, pulls him out of the water only to find that he's just a torso. This has a stellar cast.
Yeah,
I was
amazing.
Surprised. I didn't remember how many people were in this movie. We have Bill Pullman as Jack Wells, so he's the hero. And he is what was he? A fish and game officer?
Yeah, fish and game officer.
Okay. Then we have Bridget Fonda. Oh, you can't have a 90s movie without Bridget Fonda. And she is Kelly Scott, and she is an employee of the American Museum of Natural History. I don't know why they sent her because she's terrible. She pulls a tooth out of the body, and she's like, oh, it's reptilian, but nobody listens to her. They don't even consider that. They still think it's a bear, even after she determines that it's a reptilian tooth that's in the body. Oliver Platt, overacting his heart out here as probably the funniest character. Hector Sir, his name is, and I don't know what he was. He wasn't a big game hunter. He was kind of akin to the croc hunter for Steve Irwin, right? Yes. He was just kind of an adventurer, a rich adventurer. Brendan Gleeson, as we mentioned before, as the sheriff Hank, and Betty White as Dolores Bickerman.
Filthy and foul-mouthed Betty White. She was the highlight of the movie for me.
Did you realize there's 6 of these Lake Placid movies?
I thought that there were 5. I was surprised that there was more than one.
There's more than one. They're all direct to DVD or direct to TV afterwards. This is like akin to the MCU or James Bond. This is probably this is more movies than Planet of the Apes has. The original series.
Have you seen any of the other ones?
No, and I do not plan on it either. As soon as you see direct to DVD or direct to TV, it's like, no, it's not a good idea to watch a sequel. So this clueless band of characters do not realize they're dealing with a giant croc. They think they're dealing with a bear until they're actually attacked by a bear. This is one of the best scenes in the movie. They're attacked by a bear on the shore of the lake, and the croc comes out of the water in a big reveal, drags this grizzly into the water as well. And then they think, oh, we've got a croc on our hands. And it's worth it to mention that Stan Winston, who did all the special effects and the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, worked on not only, they had a CG crocodile for a lot of the attacks, but they actually had a practical 30-foot long crocodile as well for some of these scenes. And there's one great scene where Oliver Platt is in the water, turns around, and you see the full-length crocodile staring him in the face as he's slowly trying to make it back to his floating helicopter. And just imagine being in the water, even with a fake crocodile, I think would give me a heart attack. Knowing that the thing wasn't real and couldn't hurt me, it wouldn't matter. I think it would still scare the shit out of me to have something in the water with me like that.
Yeah, I would not get in the water. That would be the end of my movie career.
Now, have you seen this before? Have you seen
Never.
this film before?
No, never. Why would
Never, not even back then.
The only way that I ever see these movies is because you and Jeff say that, hey, we should watch one of these crummy movies.
What have you been doing with yourself back in the 90s? Like, what kind of movies were you watching? I don't think we've come across an old one that you've seen before.
No, it's my lost years.
So what was your take on it?
I could never get past the point that there was a saltwater crocodile in a freshwater lake in Maine. I mean, I struggled with that throughout the movie. However, Betty White for me, and she has, and we can't say this on this show, has some of the best lines that Betty White has ever uttered.
And I think the Betty White resurgence, apart from Golden Girls, started with Lake Placid. I think this really kind of cemented her into the hipster consciousness.
But I was surprised that there were 2 crocs.
Yeah, that was kind of a throwaway as well. You'd think that would be a good setup for a sequel. But again, Betty White kind of provided that herself at the end when she's feeding the... And I thought it was a great reveal that the croc was actually their pet, Betty White's and her late husband, who she fed to the crocodile. What was the story with that? Was he terminally ill, and just to cut his misery off, she fed him to the crocodile?
Yeah, but she admits this to the, wasn't it to the police?
Yeah, she does.
Well, Bernie was off fishing and had followed him home. So we threw some scraps. Well, he didn't seem to bother anybody. He became kind of like a pet who lives in the wild.
He just appeared. You have no idea how he arrived here.
No, do you?
And he's buried, and I killed him. And they're like, and they do nothing.
And yeah, she was under house arrest for part of the movie, but then they left her alone at the end just to feed the baby crocs that were in the water.
I mean, I was just happy that the cow survived.
Now, this movie does not have as big of a cinema score or a Rotten Tomatoes score as Crawl did. Rotten Tomatoes only gives it 5.1 stars out of 10. And cinema goers only gave it a C coming out of the theater.
Really?
So they were a bit disappointed. Maybe they were thinking it was going to be more of a horror movie and they were disappointed. But I think anything with Bill Pullman in your lead role is going to have some tongue-in-cheek. So you got to kind of know what you're going into with him, and especially with Betty White in here.
It's definitely better than a C.
Yeah, I think so too. It is an enjoyable watch, just like Crawl, but in a different way.
Although, would you pay money to go see it?
No, I don't think so. And I did not see this in the theater when it had come out. This was definitely a Friday night rental for me. And I was amused by it, but I haven't seen it probably since the fall of 1999. It was a nice callback when I watched it for this show.
I think we should do the marathon. I think we should watch all 6 movies.
Did that really come from your lips?
It did.
So having said that, how many buckets would we give to Lake Placid?
Now, if I gave 3 to Crawl...
Now, it's kind of apples and oranges, right?
Yeah.
Because while it is like a nature on the loose, on the attack movie, one takes itself much more seriously than the other does. So it's kind of hard to critique Lake Placid when it's taking the piss out of itself already.
Yeah, so I would go 3 as well, but for different reasons, because it is tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah. See, I think I would do the same. I gave Crawl 3.5. I enjoyed the experience of Crawl a little bit better than Lake Placid. So I would give it 3. Again, solid rating from us. So thumbs up on both movies from Mike and I. So this brings us this week to our Confessionals. Now, as both movies were kind of a man against nature scenario, there's a whole subgenre of films out there where you're getting man versus animal, man versus the elements, man versus the wild, man versus the ocean. So I've asked Mike to kind of think back on his experience with films like this and come up with a highlight for us for this confessional.
So I really didn't think very hard on this, Jim. I mean, I thought, okay, what pops into my mind immediately? And it was the Jurassic Park.
Oh, nice.
Right,
See,
so
I would have never thought of that because
What?
It's not current, it's fabricated nature, but it is nature just the same.
It is interesting in the fact that, you have this DNA encased in amber. And I'd watched this documentary recently on Nova where they had gone down into the permafrost in Siberia, and they actually have worms that are 40,000 years old that are still alive.
No, really?
Yes. Yeah, and you're just like, this is the craziest thing in the world. So it was like, keep digging and see what else you can find. I mean, I think there'll be one day where we actually find someone that's extracted like the DNA from like a woolly mammoth tusks, and we'll have woolly mammoths running again.
Now, this is the start of the zombie apocalypse right here. If one of those worms burrows itself into one of those scientists, you've got the first zombie, you've got patient zero right there, and then it's all over.
It's over, right?
Was that your only go-to, or did anything else come to mind for you? No,
I figured I was done at that point. I said, I don't need to go any further with my thinking. That's all there is.
Now, this was tough for me because like I said, there's a whole genre of movies out there, especially that came out in the 70s. So I went to things like Day of the Animals, where all the animals go nuts and they attack all these hikers in, I think, a Colorado town or a mountain-based town. I thought of Kingdom of the Spiders with William Shatner.
Ooh.
I thought of Food of the Gods, where all the giant animals attack the locals in this one town where the scientists have made a food that makes giants. I thought of Night of the Lepus, which has killer rabbits, which is a terrible, terrible movie.
Jim, I think you've seen every 4:30 movie that there
ever
have.
Was. and half of them were Man versus Nature. But just like you, I had to go to the king. Not Jurassic Park in this case, but another Steven Spielberg movie. Can you guess what I'm going to go with here?
No.
Jaws. Dun, 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 dun. Yep, I have to go with Jaws. You can't go wrong. Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Scheider. Even more so with just the dialogue and the chemistry between these three actors, just as much as the shark. So
we need a bigger boat.
So I think we should do that. Well, none of us have ever brought that up as a 5 bucket, have we?
No.
Would you consider that a 5 bucket?
Yes, I would.
Okay, then maybe we should do that one of these days. That's a great summertime movie.
It is one of the first summertime movies, if not the first.
Yeah, I think that ushered in the whole blockbuster era. That was that, and then Star Wars after it, and then the floodgates opened. This was a lean and mean episode. I think we've come to the end already. What are we clocking in at this one?
We're clocking in at
like 45 minutes?
Yes, maybe just under an hour.
Jeez. And we kept it, just like Crawl, we kept it lean this week. Oh, and lest we forget, next weekend, now keep in mind we are recording this on July the 14th, and 1 week from now is Saturday, July the 20th, and Sunday, July the 21st of 2019. Now, on those 2 dates, at the Jefferson Valley Mall, New York, there will be a local Comic-Con in that mall. And just like we attended the Middletown Comic-Con, TMI will be representing at the Jefferson Valley Mall on Saturday, possibly Sunday, but we'll definitely be there Saturday, all 3 of us this time. So if you are in that area around the Jefferson Valley Mall, come see us on July the 20th, and we will see you there. So I think next week we are discussing the entire 3rd season of Stranger Things, which so far, I've only watched 2 episodes like I mentioned before, but it is turning out to be very promising indeed, and I can't wait to talk on it.
It's wonderful.
Yep. I thought we should bring it back to the 80s for our classic feature with Stranger Things. So I pulled out Twilight Zone, the movie from the mid-80s, and then look at the facsimile of it with Stranger Things, so to see how it compares. So there you go.
I am down with some Twilight Zone.
All right. So I don't know if you've looked it up yet at your local library, but I have a copy of it. And I think you can get it streaming. So if anybody, again, as always, if they want to watch along with us, feel free to do so. We're done. Another week.
Oh, come on.
All right. See you later.
Well, your husband Bernie, you didn't by any chance lead him to the lake blindfolded?
If I had a this is where I'd tell you to suck it.